The dust had barely settled from the cowboy's horse when Sarah Mitchell realized she had been watching for him again. Her hands stilled in the wash basin, her heart doing that strange flutter it had no business doing for a man whose name she did not even know. It was 1876, in the Montana Territory, and the summer sun had just begun to crest over the Tobacco Root Mountains when Sarah stood on the front porch of her family's modest farmhouse, watching the lone rider disappear down the dirt road that cut through their property. Every single morning for the past 3 months, like clockwork, he rode past on a magnificent chestnut mare, his hat pulled low, his posture straight and sure in the saddle. Every single morning, Sarah found herself drawn to the window or the porch, watching him pass, wondering about him, imagining what his voice might sound like, what color his eyes might be beneath the shadow of that wide-brimmed hat. She was 22 years old, unmarried, and according to her mother, dangerously close to becoming a spinster in a territory where women were scarce and marriage proposals abundant. But Sarah had turned down 3 proposals in the past 2 years, much to her mother's dismay and her father's quiet approval. She wanted something more than practical arrangements and convenient partnerships. She wanted what she read about in the worn novels she borrowed from the traveling library wagon, what she saw in the way her parents still looked at each other after 25 years of marriage, a glance across the dinner table that spoke volumes, a touch that lingered just a moment longer than necessary. The farm was small but prosperous, 200 acres of good grazing land and a vegetable garden that Sarah tended with careful devotion. Her father, Thomas Mitchell, raised cattle and horses, and her younger brother, 15-year-old Daniel, helped with the daily operations while dreaming of adventure beyond the Montana plains. Her mother, Margaret, kept the household running with efficient grace, though lately she had been pressing Sarah harder about finding a husband, about securing her future before time ran out. But Sarah could not stop thinking about the cowboy who rode past every morning. His routine never varied. He appeared just after dawn, coming from the direction of the Butler Ranch 5 miles to the south, heading toward the town of Silver Creek 8 miles to the north. He never stopped, never looked toward the house, never acknowledged the farm or its inhabitants. He simply rode, steady and purposeful, a solitary figure against the vast Montana landscape. Sarah had tried to learn about him through casual conversation in town, but information was sparse. Mrs. Henderson at the general store thought he might be one of the new hands at the Butler Ranch. The blacksmith had shod his horse once and described him as quiet, polite, and generous with his payment. The saloon keeper said he came in occasionally for a whiskey, but never stayed long and never caused trouble. He was a mystery, and mysteries had always captivated Sarah in a way that the predictable known quantities of her other suitors never had. On this particular morning, the first day of August, Sarah stood on the porch with her coffee growing cold in her hands, and she made a decision. Tomorrow, when he rode past, she would wave. It was a simple gesture, perhaps even insignificant, but it felt momentous to her, like stepping off a cliff without knowing if there was water below or rocks. Her mother appeared in the doorway behind her, wiping her hands on her apron. "Sarah, those chickens will not feed themselves, and I need you to pick the green beans before the heat gets too fierce." "Yes, Mama," Sarah said, but she did not move immediately, her eyes still fixed on the empty road where dust motes danced in the early light. Margaret stepped closer, following her daughter's gaze. "You are watching for him again." It was not a question. Sarah felt her cheeks warm. "I do not know what you mean." "That cowboy, the one who rides past every morning." "You think I have not noticed you finding reasons to be outside or near the window at dawn?" Margaret's voice was gentle, not accusatory. "Who is he?" "I do not know," Sarah admitted quietly. "I have never spoken to him." Margaret was silent for a moment, and when Sarah finally turned to look at her mother, she was surprised to see a soft smile on her face. "Your father used to ride past my family's farm every morning when I was 17. He worked at the mill, and our farm was on his route." I watched him for 2 months before I finally got up the courage to wave. Sarah's eyes widened. I never knew that. There is a lot you do not know about how your father and I began, Margaret said, her eyes distant with memory. But I will tell you this, the day I waved at him, he nearly fell off his horse from surprise. And the next day, he stopped to introduce himself. And the day after that, he brought me wildflowers he had picked on his ride. 3 months later, he asked my father for permission to court me. Sarah's heart squeezed with hope and fear in equal measure. What if he does not want me to wave? What if he thinks I am too forward? Margaret reached out and tucked a strand of Sarah's dark hair behind her ear. Then he is not the man for you, but what if he has been hoping you would notice him? What if he rides this route every morning not because it is the most direct path, but because it gives him a chance to see you? The Butler Ranch is south of here, and Silver Creek is north. This is the most direct route, Sarah said practically, but her pulse quickened at her mother's words. There is another road, the Eastern Trail. It adds maybe 10 minutes to the journey. Most of the ranch hands use that one because it is better maintained. Margaret squeezed Sarah's shoulder. I am just saying, do not be afraid of a simple wave. The worst that can happen is nothing. The best that can happen is everything. That night, Sarah lay in her bed unable to sleep, rehearsing the wave in her mind. Should it be enthusiastic or subtle? Should she smile? Should she step off the porch or stay where she was? The questions chased each other in circles until she finally drifted off near midnight, her dreams filled with chestnut horses and shadowed faces. She woke before dawn, startled by her own anticipation. She dressed carefully in her blue cotton dress, the one that her best friend Emma said brought out the color of her eyes. She brushed her long, dark hair and pinned it up neatly, leaving a few tendrils to frame her face. She felt ridiculous, preparing as if for a social event when all she planned to do was wave at a passing stranger, but she could not seem to help herself. The sun was just beginning to paint the sky pink and gold when Sarah positioned herself on the porch, trying to look casual, as if she just happened to be outside at this exact moment. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the porch railing. Her brother Daniel emerged from the barn, spotted her, and grinned knowingly before disappearing back inside. Even her 15-year-old brother had noticed her morning vigils. She was not as subtle as she had hoped. Then she heard it, the rhythmic sound of hoofbeats on packed dirt. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs. She straightened, took a deep breath, and watched as horse and rider came into view around the bend in the road. He sat tall in the saddle, his body moving with the easy grace of someone who had spent more of his life on horseback than on foot. The rising sun caught the side of his face, and for the first time, Sarah could see his features clearly. He was younger than she had imagined, probably close to her own age, with strong, clean lines to his jaw and cheekbones. He wore the typical attire of a working cowboy, worn denim pants, a dark shirt, a leather vest, and that ever-present wide-brimmed hat. As he drew closer, Sarah raised her hand and waved, a simple gesture that felt like the bravest thing she had ever done. For a moment, nothing happened. He continued riding, and Sarah's heart sank, humiliation washing over her. She had misread everything. Her mother's romantic notions had given her false hope. She started to lower her hand, started to turn back toward the house. Then he pulled on the reins. His horse slowed, then stopped completely. The cowboy sat there in the middle of the road, perhaps 30 feet from where Sarah stood frozen on the porch. Slowly, he reached up and removed his hat, revealing sandy brown hair, and as he turned to look directly at her, eyes the color of summer grass. He stared at her for a long moment, and she stared back, unable to move, unable to breathe. Then, slowly, carefully, he raised his own hand in return and waved. The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise, warm and transformative. Sarah felt an answering smile spread across her own face, so wide her cheeks hurt. They stood like that, frozen in a moment that felt suspended outside of time, two people acknowledging each other across a dusty Montana road. Then he placed his hat back on his head, touched the brim in a gesture of respect and urged his horse forward. But as he passed the farm, he turned in his saddle to look back at her, and she saw that smile still on his face. Sarah stood on the porch long after he had disappeared from view, her hand still raised, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She had done it. She had waved, and he had waved back. Something had shifted, some invisible line had been crossed, and Sarah knew with absolute certainty that nothing would be quite the same again. "Well," her father's voice came from behind her, startling her. "I suppose we should learn his name since he will likely be stopping by soon." Sarah turned to find Thomas standing in the doorway, his own coffee in hand, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "Papa, you were watching. Your mother told me to keep an eye out, make sure he seemed respectable. I have been watching him ride past for a while now, checking him out." He took a sip of his coffee. He has a good seat on a horse, keeps his animal well-groomed, does not rush her or treat her roughly. You can tell a lot about a man by how he treats his horse. "I do not even know his name," Sarah said, but she was smiling. "I expect you will learn it soon enough," Thomas said. "I recognize that look. That is the look of a man who has been hoping for an invitation." The rest of that day passed in a haze for Sarah. She went through her chores mechanically, her mind replaying the moment over and over. The way he had stopped, the way he had smiled, the way he had looked back at her as he rode away. Emma came by in the afternoon to borrow some preserving jars, and Sarah told her everything, the words tumbling out in an excited rush. Emma, who had been married for a year to a farmer named John, listened with delighted interest. "Oh, Sarah, this is so romantic. What will you do tomorrow?" "I suppose I will wave again," Sarah said, though the thought made her nervous all over again. "What else can I do?" "You could be outside, closer to the road. You could speak to him if he stops," Emma suggested, her eyes bright with vicarious excitement. "Speak to him." "What would I say?" Sarah felt panic rising. Waving had been one thing, but actual conversation was something else entirely. "You could say good morning, you could ask his name, you could tell him yours. It does not have to be complicated, Sarah, just be yourself." Emma squeezed her hand. "Any man would be lucky to know you." That night, Sarah again struggled to sleep. She rehearsed opening lines in her head, imagined conversations, played out scenarios ranging from wonderful to mortifying. When dawn finally came, she was exhausted but too keyed up to feel it. She chose her yellow dress, the one with the small white flowers embroidered on the collar. She took extra care with her hair, weaving it into a braid that hung over her shoulder. Her mother smiled at her from across the breakfast table but said nothing, though the knowing look in her eyes spoke volumes. This time, Sarah positioned herself near the vegetable garden, which was closer to the road than the porch. She made a show of checking the tomato plants, though she was so focused on listening for hoofbeats that she could not have said whether the plants were thriving or dying. When she heard him coming, her hands stilled on the leaves. She straightened slowly, brushing dirt from her hands, trying to calm her racing heart. She looked up as he came around the bend. This time he was already watching for her. She could see it in the way his gaze went immediately to the porch, then swept the yard until it found her by the garden. This time, when she raised her hand to wave, he was already pulling back on the reins, already slowing his horse. He stopped directly in front of where she stood, separated from her only by the split-rail fence that bordered the road. Up close, he was even more handsome than she had realized. His face was tanned from long hours in the sun, with fine lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often. Those green eyes studied her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He removed his hat again, holding it against his chest. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he said, "Good morning, miss," and his voice was exactly as she had imagined it would be, deep and warm with a hint of roughness like aged whiskey. "Good morning," Sarah managed, her own voice coming out softer than she intended. "I am glad you waved yesterday," he said, and there was something vulnerable in the way he said it, something honest and unguarded. "I have been riding past here for months, hoping you might notice me. Sarah's eyes widened. "I noticed you the very first morning you rode past." His smile transformed his face again, and she realized she could become addicted to making him smile like that. "Then I wish I had known. I have wasted a lot of mornings." He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "My name is James Bridger. I work at the Butler Ranch." Sarah Mitchell. "This is my family's farm." She gestured toward the house, where she could see the curtain in the front window twitch. Her mother was definitely watching. "I know," James said, then quickly added, I know this is the Mitchell farm. I did not know your name was Sarah, but it suits you." "How does a name suit someone when you do not know them?" Sarah asked, feeling emboldened by his obvious nervousness. "Sarah means princess, does it not? And you look like you should be in a palace instead of on a Montana farm, if you do not mind my saying so." He was blushing now. She could see the color rising in his cheeks above his collar, and she found it absolutely endearing. "I do not mind," Sarah said softly. "And James means supplanter, one who follows. Is that what brought you to Montana? You know your name meanings," he observed, impressed. "And yes, in a way. I came from Ohio 2 years ago, following stories of opportunities in the West. My father has a small farm back home, but I am the youngest of 4 sons. There was no land for me there, no future except as hired help on someone else's property, so I came west to make my own way." "Do you like it here?" Sarah asked, wanting to know everything about him, wanting this conversation to never end. "I like it more as of yesterday," James said, and the sincerity in his voice made Sarah's heart skip. "Miss Mitchell, I know this is forward and you do not know me, but would it be acceptable if I stopped to speak with you each morning? Just for a few minutes. I promise to be respectful and proper." "I would like that very much," Sarah said, unable to keep the joy from her voice. "Then I will see you tomorrow morning," James said. He put his hat back on, touched the brim, and with one last lingering look, urged his horse forward. Sarah watched him go, her hand raised in farewell, her heart so full she thought it might burst. When she finally turned back toward the house, she saw her entire family crowded at the front window. Her mother, her father, and Daniel all watching with undisguised interest. She laughed, shaking her head, and went to face their questions. The next morning began a pattern that would define the following weeks. James stopped every morning and they talked across the fence. At first, their conversations were brief, both of them shy and careful. He told her about his work at the ranch, about the cattle drives and the long days in the saddle. She told him about the farm, about her vegetable garden and her small flock of chickens, about the books she loved to read. As the days passed, their conversations grew longer, deeper. James began leaving earlier from the ranch, so he would have more time to spend with Sarah before he needed to be in town. Sarah began waking even earlier to make sure she was ready when he arrived. They talked about their childhoods, their families, their dreams. James wanted to own his own ranch someday, to build something permanent and lasting. Sarah wanted to see more of the world, but also to have a home filled with love and laughter, like the one she had grown up in. 2 weeks after their first conversation, James asked if he could speak to her father. Sarah's heart leaped into her throat. "About what?" she asked, though she hoped she knew. "About courting you properly," James said, his green eyes serious. "I know it has only been a short time, but Sarah, I have never felt this way about anyone. Every minute I spend with you, I find something new to admire. Your kindness, your intelligence, your sense of humor, the way you see beauty in simple things. I do not want to just talk to you across a fence for a few minutes each morning. I want to spend real time with you, to take you to the church social and the town dances, to sit on your porch in the evening and watch the sunset. I want to do this right, with your father's permission and blessing." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but they were happy tears. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, talk to my father." That evening, James returned to the farm, freshly washed and wearing his best clothes, his hat in his hands as he knocked on the door. Thomas invited him in, and Sarah and her mother discreetly left the men alone in the sitting room, though Sarah could barely stand the suspense of not knowing what was being said. After 30 minutes that felt like hours, Thomas called Sarah into the room. James stood near the fireplace, looking nervous but hopeful. Her father's face was serious but not unkind. "Mr. Bridger has asked permission to court you," Thomas said to Sarah. "He has been honest about his current circumstances and his future prospects. He has been respectful in his approach. The decision, however, is partly yours. Is this what you want, Sarah?" Sarah looked at James, at the hope and vulnerability in his eyes, and she felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. "Yes, Papa, this is what I want," Thomas nodded. "Then you have my permission, Mr. Bridger. But I expect you to treat my daughter with the utmost respect. You will not be alone together without a chaperone. You will have her home at reasonable hours, and if your intentions prove to be dishonorable, you will answer to me." "My intentions are completely honorable, sir," James said firmly. "I promise you, I will treat Sarah as the treasure she is." And he did. For the next 3 months, James courted Sarah with a devotion and tenderness that made her fall more in love with him every day. He took her to the church social, where they danced together for the first time, and Sarah discovered that he was surprisingly graceful for such a tall man. He brought her wildflowers picked from the meadows near the ranch, each bouquet chosen with care. He sat with her family on Sunday afternoons, charming her mother with his polite manners and impressing her father with his knowledge of ranching and his solid work ethic. He told her about his family back in Ohio, about his mother who was an excellent baker and his father who was quiet but wise. He shared his dreams of owning his own land, of building a home and raising a family. Sarah told him about her childhood, about the time she fell in the creek trying to catch a frog and her father had to pull her out, about her love of reading, and how she sometimes stayed up too late with a book and a candle, getting lost in other worlds. They talked about everything and nothing, discovering the rhythms of each other's thoughts and hearts. James made her laugh with stories of mishaps on the ranch, like the time a particularly stubborn bull chased him up a tree and he had to wait 3 hours for help. Sarah impressed him with her knowledge of plants and herbs, explaining how she used different plants for cooking and medicine. They found they shared a love of the Montana landscape, the vast skies and distant mountains, the way the light changed throughout the day. But beyond the talking, there were moments that spoke louder than words. The way James looked at her when she laughed, as if she were the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. The way Sarah felt safe and valued in his presence, as if she could truly be herself without pretense or performance. The accidental brush of hands that sent electricity through both of them. The longing looks when they had to part, counting the hours until they would see each other again. In late October, as the leaves were turning gold and the air carried the first hint of winter, James took Sarah for a chaperoned ride up into the foothills. Emma and her husband John came along, riding a respectful distance behind to give them the illusion of privacy while maintaining propriety. James led them to a spot where the land opened up to reveal a stunning view of the valley below, the farmlands spread out like a patchwork quilt, the town of Silver Creek visible in the distance, smoke rising from its chimneys. He helped Sarah down from her horse, his hands lingering at her waist, and they stood together looking at the view. "Sarah," James said quietly, and something in his tone made her turn to look at him. He was staring at her with such intensity, such naked emotion that her breath caught. "I need to tell you something, and I cannot wait any longer." "What is it?" she asked, her heart beginning to race. "I love you," he said simply, the words falling into the space between them like stones into still water, creating ripples that spread and spread. "I have loved you since that first morning when you waved at me, maybe even before that. I love your kindness and your strength. I love the way you care for your family and your garden. I love the way you think deeply about things, the way you are not afraid to speak your mind. I love the way you laugh, the way you look at the world with wonder and hope. I love everything about you, Sarah Mitchell, and I needed you to know." Sarah felt tears spilling down her cheeks. "James," she whispered, and then the words burst from her like they had been waiting to be spoken since the beginning of time. "I love you too. I love you so much it frightens me sometimes how much I love you. I love your gentleness and your strength. I love the way you treat your horse and speak to my father. I love the way you make me feel safe and cherished. I love the dreams you share with me, the way you see a future that includes us both. I love you, James Bridger, with my whole heart." He reached for her hands, holding them gently in his larger, calloused ones. "I do not have much to offer you right now. I am just a ranch hand with some savings and a lot of dreams, but I swear to you, Sarah, I will work every day to build a life worthy of you. I will get my own land, build us a home, give you everything you deserve." "I do not need everything," Sarah said, squeezing his hands. "I just need you." Behind them, Emma let out a small, happy sigh and they both laughed, remembering they were not alone. But James did not let go of Sarah's hands, and Sarah did not want him to. They stood there on the hillside, the autumn wind swirling around them, the future spread out before them as vast and promising as the Montana sky. That night, Sarah lay in bed replaying every moment, every word. James loved her. He had said it out loud, made it real and tangible, and she had told him the truth of her own heart, held nothing back. She felt changed by it, transformed in some fundamental way. She was no longer just Sarah Mitchell, farm girl from Montana Territory. She was Sarah Mitchell, who was loved by James Bridger and who loved him in return. The next morning, James appeared as usual, but there was something different in the way he looked at her now, something open and sure. They had crossed another threshold, moved into new territory where the words "I love you" had been spoken and could not be taken back, nor would either of them want to. "Good morning," he said, dismounting from his horse and walking to the fence where she stood. This had become their routine, him on foot, her on her side of the fence, the barrier both of frustration and a necessary propriety. "Good morning," she replied, unable to keep from smiling. "I spoke to Mr. Butler yesterday," James said, and Sarah's heart quickened at the serious tone. "I told him about you, about us, about my intentions. I asked him about the possibility of buying some of the ranch land, the northern section that he does not use much for grazing." "What did he say?" Sarah asked breathlessly. "He said he would consider it. He knows I have been saving my wages, and he respects my work. He said if I can come up with half the money by spring, he will hold the land for me and let me pay the rest over time." James's eyes were bright with hope and determination. "It is not much, maybe 200 acres, but it is a start. There is a creek running through it, good grass, a spot where a house could be built with a view of the mountains." "It sounds perfect," Sarah said softly. "I want to build that house for you, Sarah. I want to marry you and spend the rest of my life making you happy." He paused, then added quickly, "I am not proposing right now, not properly. I want to do that right when I can offer you something concrete, but I want you to know my intentions where my heart and mind are fixed." "My heart and mind are fixed in the same place," Sarah assured him, reaching through the fence to touch his hand. They were married the following June in 1877 in a ceremony at the small church in Silver Creek. Sarah wore a dress that her mother had helped her sew from fabric they had ordered specially from a catalog. A simple but elegant white dress with lace at the collar and cuffs. James wore a new suit that he had saved up for, and when Sarah walked down the aisle on her father's arm, the look on James's face made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. Emma stood as her maid of honor, and John stood as James's best man. Sarah's parents and brother were there, beaming with pride and joy. True to his word, James had come up with half the money for the land by spring. Mr. Butler had honored his promise, and the papers had been signed making James a landowner. Construction on their house had begun immediately, and though it was not yet finished, enough had been completed to make it livable. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, James kissed Sarah with such tenderness and reverence that she felt it all the way to her soul. They were married. They belonged to each other now, officially and completely. The reception was held at the Mitchell farm, with tables set up in the yard laden with food that the community had brought to share. There was music and dancing, laughter and celebration. It was simple by some standards, but to Sarah, it was absolutely perfect. As the sun began to set, James helped Sarah into the wagon that would take them to their new home. Their guests waved and shouted well wishes as they drove away, and Sarah leaned against her husband's shoulder, marveling at how much her life had changed since that morning she had waved. "Happy?" James asked, kissing the top of her head. "Happier than I knew it was possible to be," Sarah replied honestly. Their house was small, just 3 rooms, but it was solid and well built, constructed with James's own hands over the past few months with help from neighbors and ranch hands. The bedroom had a real glass window that looked out toward the mountains. The kitchen had a good stove that Mr. Butler had given them as a wedding present. The main room had a fireplace and enough space for a table and chairs, with room to grow as their family grew. James carried Sarah over the threshold, making her laugh with the ceremonial gesture, and set her down gently in the middle of their home. "Welcome home, Mrs. Bridger," he said, and Sarah loved the sound of her new name, loved the way it tied her to this man she adored. That night, they consummated their marriage with a tenderness and passion that Sarah had read about in her novels, but had not truly understood until now. James was gentle and patient, making sure Sarah felt safe and cherished, and when they finally came together as husband and wife, Sarah felt a completeness she had never experienced before. This was what it meant to become one flesh, to give yourself to another person and receive them in return. Afterward, they lay tangled together in their marriage bed, talking and laughing quietly, learning this new intimacy, this new closeness that was now their right and privilege. The days that followed established the pattern of their married life. James worked the ranch, building up his herd with cattle he purchased from sales and trades. Sarah managed their home, planting a large vegetable garden, keeping chickens, preserving food for the winter. They worked side by side whenever possible, James helping her with the heavy work of the garden, Sarah helping him with the branding and roundups when extra hands were needed. In the evenings, they sat together on their small porch, watching the sun set over the mountains, talking about their day, making plans for the future. James was building a larger barn for winter shelter for the cattle. Sarah wanted to get a milk cow and maybe some pigs. They talked about children, about the family they wanted to build, about how many bedrooms they would need to add to the house. "I want at least 4 children," Sarah said one evening as they sat wrapped in a blanket against the October chill, her first autumn as a married woman. 4. James raised his eyebrows. "That is a lot of mouths to feed." "You said you wanted a big family," Sarah reminded him. "I do," he agreed, pulling her closer. "I want this house to be filled with noise and laughter and the sound of children playing. I want what you had growing up, that feeling of being part of something solid and good." "Then we are agreed," Sarah said, tilting her face up to kiss him. By spring of 1878, Sarah discovered she was pregnant. The realization came gradually, a missed monthly course, waves of nausea in the morning, a tenderness in her breasts. When she was finally certain, she waited for the perfect moment to tell James. He had been working long hours preparing for calving season, and she wanted to tell him when he was rested and they could celebrate properly. One Sunday afternoon, after church and a meal with her parents, they returned home to find the world quiet and peaceful, the spring sunshine warm on the new grass, the mountains still crowned with snow. They sat on their porch, and Sarah took James's hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "There is a life growing here," she said softly. "Our child. You are going to be a father, James." The expression on his face went through several stages: confusion, realization, wonder, and finally pure joy. "Truly." He breathed, his hand spreading wider on her stomach as if he could feel the tiny life within. "Truly," Sarah confirmed, tears of happiness spilling down her cheeks. "The baby should come in late autumn, probably November." James pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, his own eyes wet with tears. "Sarah, my Sarah," he murmured into her hair. "You have made me the happiest man in Montana, in the whole world." The pregnancy progressed well. Sarah had some morning sickness in the early months, but it faded as summer arrived. Her belly grew round and prominent, and James treated her like she was made of the finest china, insisting she not lift anything heavy, not work too hard in the garden, not tire herself out. Sarah found it both endearing and occasionally frustrating, but she knew it came from love, from his deep desire to protect her and their unborn child. Her mother visited often, bringing advice and baby clothes she had saved from when Sarah and Daniel were small. Emma came by regularly, excited about the baby, eager to share her own experiences since she was now mother to a 6-month-old son. The community of women around Sarah formed a support network that she had not fully appreciated until now, each one sharing knowledge and wisdom passed down through generations. In mid-November, as the first snow began to dust the mountains, Sarah's labor began. It started in the early morning with a tightening across her abdomen that she initially thought was just the baby moving. But as the tightening became more regular and more intense, she knew. James had gone to check on the cattle in the north pasture, and Sarah sent young Daniel, who had ridden over to help with some chores, racing to find him. By the time James returned, riding his horse at a dangerous speed, Sarah's contractions were coming hard and fast. Her mother was already there, summoned by Daniel's frantic message, and Emma had arrived shortly after. The women had taken over the bedroom, boiling water and gathering clean linens, preparing for the birth. James was relegated to the main room, pacing like a caged animal, flinching every time he heard Sarah cry out. Thomas had come with Margaret, and he sat calmly in a chair watching his son-in-law wear a path in the floor. "She will be fine," Thomas said for the 10th time. "Margaret went through this twice, and both times she was stronger than I expected. Women are tougher than we give them credit for." "I cannot stand hearing her in pain," James said, his face pale with worry. "I should be in there with her. Trust me, son, you do not want to be in there. This is women's work. Our job is to wait and pray and be ready to meet our child when it arrives." The labor lasted into the night, long hours of pain and fear and endurance. Sarah worked through each contraction with determination, drawing on reserves of strength she had not known she possessed. Margaret held her hand and wiped her face with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement. Emma, who had been through this recently herself, offered practical advice and support. Finally, in the early hours of the morning, as a new day was being born outside, Sarah's baby entered the world. The first cry split the air, lusty and strong, and Sarah collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted but elated. "It is a boy," Margaret announced, tears streaming down her face. "You have a son, Sarah." Emma cleaned the baby quickly and wrapped him in a soft blanket before placing him in Sarah's arms. Sarah looked down at the tiny, red, wrinkled face and felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible. He was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, a shock of dark hair and eyes that seemed to look right into her soul. "James," she whispered. "I need James." Margaret opened the door and called to James, who practically flew into the room. He stopped at the threshold when he saw Sarah holding the bundle, his eyes wide with wonder and fear. "Come meet your son," Sarah said, her voice hoarse from hours of labor. James approached slowly, as if in a dream, and sat carefully on the edge of the bed. Sarah turned slightly so he could see the baby's face. "James Bridger, meet your son." "My son," James breathed, reaching out one finger to gently touch the baby's tiny hand. The baby's fingers curled reflexively around James's finger, and James let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "He is so small, so perfect. What should we name him?" Sarah asked. Though they had discussed names throughout the pregnancy, they had not made a final decision. "I want to name him after your father, if that is acceptable to you," James said, looking up at Sarah with shining eyes. "Thomas, For the man who raised the woman I love, who gave me his blessing to marry her, who welcomed me into his family." Sarah looked past James to where her father stood in the doorway, and she saw the emotion on his face, the way he pressed his hand to his heart. "Papa," she asked softly. "I would be honored," Thomas said, his voice thick with feeling. "Thomas Bridger," Sarah said, testing the name. "Tommy? Yes, that is perfect." The baby, as if agreeing, made a small sound and nuzzled against Sarah's breast, seeking food. The women discreetly helped Sarah with the first feeding while James stepped out, though he did not go far. Within minutes, he was back, unable to stay away from his wife and new son. Those first weeks with Tommy were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Sarah, still recovering from childbirth, was overwhelmed by the constant needs of a newborn. Tommy needed to be fed every few hours, needed to be changed and held and soothed. She was grateful for James, who took over all the household chores and outdoor work, who sat with her during late-night feedings, who walked the floor with Tommy when the baby was fussy, giving Sarah precious moments to rest. "I had no idea it would be this hard," Sarah admitted one night as she nursed Tommy for what felt like the 100th time that day. "You are doing beautifully," James assured her, sitting beside her on the bed, his arm around her shoulders. "He is healthy and growing, that is all because of you." "We are doing it together," Sarah corrected, leaning into him. "I could not manage without you." As winter set in hard, they settled into a routine. Tommy began sleeping for longer stretches at night, giving Sarah more rest. Her body healed from the trauma of birth. James continued to work the ranch, though the winter work was less demanding than other seasons. They spent long evenings as a family, sitting by the fire, Sarah mending or knitting while James carved small toys for Tommy, the baby sleeping peacefully in the cradle James had built with his own hands. Spring brought new challenges and new joys. Tommy was growing, becoming more alert and interactive. His eyes had settled into a green similar to James's, and his hair was darkening to match Sarah's. He smiled and cooed, reaching for their faces, responding to their voices. Sarah fell more in love with her son every day, marveling at the miracle of him, this new person they had created together. James was proving to be a devoted father. He talked to Tommy constantly, narrating everything he did, singing to him in a surprisingly pleasant voice, playing gentle games. When Tommy was old enough, James insisted on taking him out to see the horses and cattle, holding him carefully, showing him the ranch that would one day be his legacy. "You are going to spoil him," Sarah teased one afternoon as she watched James blow raspberries on Tommy's stomach, making the baby shriek with laughter. "He is my son," James said, as if that explained everything. "I am supposed to spoil him." Life fell into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch grew slowly but steadily. James added to his herd, expanded the barn, bought more equipment. Sarah's garden flourished, and she became known in Silver Creek for her preserves and pickles, which she sometimes traded at the general store for things they needed. They attended church every Sunday, became more involved in the community, made friends among the other ranching families. When Tommy was 18 months old, Sarah discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the news was less of a surprise but no less joyful. James swept her up and spun her around, much to her laughing protests, and Tommy, watching from his spot on the floor, clapped his little hands in imitation of his father's joy. "Another baby," James said wonderingly. "Our family is growing, Sarah." This pregnancy was different from the first. Sarah was more tired, chasing after an active toddler while carrying a new life. But she was also more confident, knowing what to expect, remembering that the discomforts were temporary and the reward was immeasurable. Tommy seemed to sense something was different, becoming more clingy and affectionate, often resting his head against Sarah's growing belly. In the spring of 1880, their second child was born, another long labor, but this time Sarah knew what to expect, knew how to work with her body rather than fighting against the pain. When the baby finally arrived, Margaret announced, "It is a girl this time, a beautiful baby girl." Sarah held her daughter, marveling at her tiny features, so delicate and perfect. She had a dusting of reddish blonde hair, and when she opened her eyes, they were a deep blue that might change as she grew. James was besotted immediately, standing by the bed and staring at his daughter as if she were the eighth wonder of the world. "What shall we name her?" he asked softly. "I was thinking Margaret, after my mother," Sarah said, looking at her mother who stood nearby. "But we could call her Maggie, give her her own identity." Margaret wiped tears from her eyes. "I would be honored beyond words." "Maggie Bridger," James said, reaching down to let his daughter wrap her tiny hand around his finger just as her brother had done. "Welcome to the family, little one." Tommy, almost 2 years old now, was brought in to meet his baby sister. He looked at her with serious, curious eyes, then reached out a pudgy hand to gently pat her head. "Baby," he said clearly, one of his few words. "Yes, baby sister," Sarah confirmed. "You have to help Mama and Papa take care of her, okay?" Tommy nodded solemnly, and Sarah's heart swelled with love for her little family. Life with 2 children was chaotic and beautiful. Tommy was an energetic, curious toddler who got into everything. Maggie was a calmer baby than her brother had been, content to watch the world from her mother's arms or her cradle. Sarah sometimes felt overwhelmed by the demands of 2 small children, the endless cycle of feeding and changing and cleaning. But James remained her steadfast partner, taking the children when she needed a break, helping with the nighttime wakings, praising her constantly for the incredible work she was doing. Their love for each other, if anything, had deepened through the years and challenges. They stole moments of intimacy when they could, late at night after the children were asleep, early in the morning before they woke. They still talked for hours, though now their conversations were often interrupted by childish demands. They still looked at each other with the same wonder and affection as those early days of courtship, though now that look was colored by the shared experiences of building a life and family together. The ranch continued to prosper. James had paid off the land completely and had purchased an additional 100 acres from a neighbor who was moving back east. He hired a young man named Robert to help with the daily work, giving James more time to spend with his family. Sarah had expanded her garden and now kept a larger flock of chickens, selling eggs in town for extra income. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable and secure, with enough to meet their needs and even save a little for the future. When Maggie was 2 and Tommy was 4, Sarah became pregnant for a 3rd time. This pregnancy was harder on her body, now 31 years old and feeling every year. She was often exhausted, her back ached, her ankles swelled. James worried constantly, trying to convince her to do less, to rest more. Sarah tried to follow his advice, but with 2 active children and a household to run, rest was a luxury. This baby came early, in late winter of 1882, arriving 3 weeks before Sarah's calculated due date. The labor was fast and intense, barely giving her time to prepare. Emma, who lived closest, came to help, but there was no time to send for Margaret. Emma, remembering her own experiences and drawing on what she had learned, helped Sarah through the birth. Another boy entered the world, smaller than his siblings had been but healthy and strong. By the time Margaret arrived an hour later, Sarah was already nursing him. Emma was cleaning up, and James was sitting on the bed beside his wife, one arm around her, staring at his newest son in awe. "3 children," he murmured. "Sarah, you are amazing." They named this boy Daniel after Sarah's brother, who had grown into a fine young man of 21 and was now working a claim in the northern part of the territory, hoping to strike silver. Young Daniel, who everyone quickly started calling Danny to differentiate him from his uncle, was a fussy baby, colicky and demanding. Sarah spent many long nights walking the floor with him, trying to soothe his cries, exhausted but determined. James helped as much as he could, but Danny seemed to prefer his mother, only settling truly when he was in Sarah's arms. Tommy and Maggie adjusted to the new baby with the resilience of young children. Tommy, now 4, tried to help, bringing his mother things she needed, entertaining Maggie when Sarah was busy with the baby. Maggie, 2 years old, was curious about the baby but also occasionally jealous of the attention he received. Sarah and James worked hard to make sure the older children did not feel neglected, spending individual time with each of them when possible. As the children grew, the house seemed to shrink. What had once felt spacious now felt cramped with 3 children, all their belongings, and the daily chaos of family life. James began planning an addition, 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. He worked on it during the slower winter months, and by the time Danny was a year old, the addition was complete. Sarah stood in the new kitchen, twice the size of the old one, with room for a larger table and more storage, and she felt tears of gratitude prick her eyes. "It is perfect," she told James. "You have built us a wonderful home." "I would build you a castle if I could," James said, wrapping his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "You deserve so much more than I can give you." "I have everything I need," Sarah said, turning in his arms to face him. "A man who loves me, healthy children, a home we built together, friends and family around us. What more could I possibly want?" "I love you, Sarah Bridger," James said, kissing her softly. "More today than yesterday, but not as much as tomorrow." It was a phrase he said often, one that never failed to make Sarah's heart flutter. Even after years of marriage, 3 children, the daily struggles and challenges of ranch life, they were still deeply in love. They still found reasons to laugh together, still stole kisses when the children were not looking, still talked late into the night about their dreams and fears and hopes. The years passed in a blur of activity and growth. Tommy grew into a serious, responsible boy who loved helping his father with the ranch work. At 8 years old, he could already ride a horse competently and help with basic cattle work. Maggie was 6, a bright, curious girl who loved reading as much as her mother did. Sarah taught her letters and numbers, reading to her from the books Sarah had loved as a child. Danny, now 4, was the wild child, constantly getting into mischief, fearless and energetic, keeping Sarah constantly on her toes. The ranch had grown to over 500 acres, with a substantial herd of cattle and a small operation breeding horses that were known for their quality. James had earned a reputation as a fair, honest rancher, and other ranchers often came to him for advice. He had become a respected member of the community, serving on the town council and helping settle disputes. Sarah, too, had found her place in the community. She was known for her kindness and wisdom, often helping new mothers or tending to sick neighbors with her knowledge of herbs and remedies. She taught Sunday school at the church, organized community events, and maintained her large garden that fed her family and provided produce she shared with others. In the summer of 1886, Sarah's father Thomas suffered a heart attack. He survived, but the incident left him weakened, unable to manage the farm as he once had. Daniel had returned from the Northern Territories, his dreams of striking it rich unrealized, and he took over the main operation of the Mitchell farm. But Thomas's health continued to decline, and in the fall he passed away peacefully in his sleep, with Margaret at his side. Sarah grieved deeply for her father, the man who had given her life, raised her with love, welcomed James into the family with open arms. At the funeral, she stood between her husband and her mother, her children gathered around her, and she thought about how much her father had given her, not just life but the example of what a good man looked like, what a loving marriage could be. She had found that in James, and she knew her father had gone to his rest knowing his daughter was cherished and cared for. Margaret moved in with Daniel on the farm, but she was lonely and adrift without her husband of 38 years. Sarah visited her as often as she could, bringing the children to brighten their grandmother's days. James, understanding her need to be close to her mother during this time, took on more of the household work, never complaining about the extra burden. As the children grew older and more independent, Sarah found she had more time for herself. She took up quilting, creating beautiful pieces that told stories in fabric and thread. She read more borrowed books from the traveling library and from friends, losing herself in stories of other places and times. She and Emmer remained close friends, their children growing up together, spending long afternoons visiting while their children played. Tommy turned 12 in 1888, officially becoming more help than hindrance on the ranch. James began teaching him the business side of ranching, how to keep books and plan for future needs. Maggie was 10, already showing signs of the beauty she would become, with her mother's dark hair and her father's green eyes. She helped Sarah with the household work but also loved being outside, riding horses and climbing trees much to her mother's dismay. Danny was 8, still wild and rambunctious, but showing flashes of the man he would become, loyal and brave and good-hearted. One evening, as Sarah and James sat on their porch watching the sun set, as they had done countless times over the past 12 years of marriage, James reached over and took her hand. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Waving at me that morning?" Sarah looked at him in surprise. "Regret it, James, it was the best decision I ever made. Why would you ask that?" "I see how tired you are sometimes, how hard you work. 3 children, the house, the garden, helping with the ranch, caring for your mother. I wonder if you imagined this life would be so much work when you were a young woman dreaming about romance." Sarah squeezed his hand. "James Bridger, look at me." She waited until he met her eyes. "I have never regretted a single moment. Yes, life is hard sometimes. Yes, I get tired and overwhelmed, but I would not trade this life for anything. You gave me everything I ever wanted, love and partnership and family. These children we made together, they are the greatest joy of my life. This home we built, this ranch we are creating, it is all more than I ever dreamed. Every hardship is worth it because I face it with you beside me. I love you so much," James said, his voice rough with emotion. "Sometimes I look at you and I still cannot believe you are mine, that you chose me." "We chose each other," Sarah corrected. "That morning when I waved and you stopped, we chose each other, and I would make that choice again every single day for the rest of my life." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple, and Sarah thought about the journey that had brought them here. It had started with a simple wave, one small gesture of courage that had changed everything. She had taken a chance on a cowboy she did not know, and he had proven worthy of that chance 1,000 times over. The years continued to unfold. In 1890, Tommy announced at 16 that he wanted to go to the agricultural college in Bozeman, Montana, to study modern ranching techniques. Sarah's first instinct was to refuse, to keep her firstborn close, but James encouraged it. "Let him learn," James said. "He will come back and help us make this ranch even better." So Tommy went off to college and the house felt emptier without him. But he wrote letters every week, telling them about his studies, his new friends, the exciting ideas he was learning. Sarah saved every letter, proud of her son and his ambition. Maggie was 12, on the cusp of young womanhood, and beginning to attract the attention of boys in town. Sarah watched with a mixture of pride and trepidation, remembering her own youth, her own path to love. Danny was 10, finally settling down a bit, showing an aptitude for working with horses that James encouraged. In the spring of 1892, Margaret passed away in her sleep. She had been declining for months, never truly recovering from Thomas's death 6 years earlier. Sarah mourned her mother but found comfort in the fact that her parents were together again, and in the legacy they had left behind in their children and grandchildren. That summer, Sarah and James celebrated their 15th wedding anniversary. James surprised her by taking her to the spot where he had first told her he loved her, the hilltop overlooking the valley. They rode up alone, leaving the children in Daniel's care, and stood together looking at the view. 15 years, James marveled. It feels like yesterday and also like forever. "I know what you mean," Sarah said, leaning against him. "I can barely remember what life was like before you." "I never want you to have to find out what life is like without me," James said seriously. Promise me, Sarah, if something happens to me, you will be okay. You will take care of yourself and the children. You will not give up. Nothing is going to happen to you, Sarah said firmly, pushing away the cold fear his words evoked. We are going to grow old together, watch our grandchildren grow up, sit on our porch when we are 80 years old and remember this day. Promise me anyway, James insisted. Please. I promise, Sarah said, though the words felt heavy on her tongue, but you have to promise me the same thing. I promise, James agreed, kissing the top of her head. They stood there for a long time, holding each other, watching the valley below where their life was spread out, the ranch, the children, everything they had built together. Tommy graduated from college in 1894 and returned home full of ideas and enthusiasm. At 20, he was a man now, tall and strong like his father, with Sarah's dark hair and his father's green eyes. He threw himself into improving the ranch, implementing new techniques he had learned, suggesting changes and innovations. James listened to all of it, sometimes adopting Tommy's ideas, sometimes gently explaining why the old ways worked better in their particular situation. Father and son worked together in easy partnership, and Sarah watched with pride at the man her little boy had become. Maggie turned 16 that year, and the house was suddenly full of young men coming to call, asking permission to court her. James terrified every single one of them with his stern father routine, though Sarah saw the twinkle in his eye that said he was enjoying himself. Maggie handled it all with grace and humor, not taking any of the boys too seriously, telling her father she was not ready to settle down yet. I want what you and Mama have, she told James one evening after turning down yet another proposal. I want someone who looks at me the way you look at her, like I am the most precious thing in the world. I am willing to wait for that. James hugged his daughter tightly, his eyes suspiciously bright. You are wise beyond your years, Maggie girl, and when the right man comes along, he will be the luckiest man in Montana. Danny, now 12, was already talking about wanting his own horse ranch someday, breeding and training horses for a living. James encouraged this dream, helping Danny learn everything about horses, letting him take the lead in training the young colts they raised each year. Sarah, at 42 years old, sometimes felt the weight of her age. Her back ached more often, her hands were not as nimble as they once were, her face showed lines that spoke of years of sun and wind and laughter. But when she looked in the mirror, she did not see an old woman. She saw a woman who had lived fully, loved deeply, built something lasting. In the fall of 1896, tragedy struck. Tommy had been helping move cattle to the winter pasture when his horse spooked at a rattlesnake and threw him. He hit his head on a rock and lost consciousness. By the time the other ranch hands got him home and the doctor came from town, he had been unconscious for hours. The doctor did what he could, but there was bleeding in the brain, he explained, and all they could do was wait and pray. Sarah sat by her son's bedside for 3 days straight, holding his hand, talking to him, begging him to wake up. James sat with her when he could, his face haggard with worry and fear. Maggie and Danny took turns keeping vigil, the whole family united in their fear and hope. On the third night, Tommy opened his eyes. He was confused and in pain, but he was alive and awake. The doctor, when he returned the next morning, called it a miracle. There was a long recovery ahead, but Tommy would live. During those weeks of Tommy's recovery, Sarah found herself clinging to James more than usual, needing the reassurance of his presence. They had come so close to losing their firstborn, and it had shaken her to her core. James seemed to feel it too, holding her tighter at night, watching the children more intently, as if trying to memorize every detail. I keep thinking about what you made me promise, Sarah admitted one night as they lay in bed. About going on if something happened to you. James, if I had lost Tommy, I do not know how I would have survived it. How do people go on after losing a child? Because they have to, James said quietly. Because there are other people who need them, because giving up dishonors the memory of the one who was lost. But thank God we do not have to find out, Tommy is going to be fine. And he was. By Christmas of that year, Tommy was mostly recovered, though he suffered occasional headaches and had a scar on his temple where he had hit the rock. He was more cautious now, more aware of his own mortality, but also more determined to make every day count. The turn of the century came, and it felt momentous, the beginning of a new era. Sarah was 46, James 45. They had been married for 23 years, had raised 3 children who were now young adults, had built a successful ranch that was respected throughout the territory. Montana had achieved statehood in 1889, and they were now citizens of a state rather than a territory, part of a nation that was growing and changing rapidly. Tommy, at 26, announced his engagement to a young woman named Catherine, the daughter of a rancher from a neighboring county. Sarah liked her immediately, a practical, cheerful girl who clearly adored Tommy. They were married in the spring of 1901, and James deeded them a portion of the ranch land to build their own home and start their own operation. Maggie, 23 and still unmarried despite numerous proposals, announced that she wanted to become a teacher. She had been helping at the school in Silver Creek for the past year and had discovered a passion for education. Sarah supported her completely, remembering her own love of learning, proud of her daughter for choosing her own path. Danny, at 19, was working full-time with the horses, building a reputation for his skill with training. He had a quiet confidence with animals that reminded Sarah of James, a patience and understanding that made even the most skittish horse trust him. In 1902, Tommy and Catherine announced that Sarah and James were going to be grandparents. The news filled Sarah with joy and a strange bittersweetness. She was going to be a grandmother. When had she gotten old enough to be a grandmother? But when the baby came, a little girl they named Sarah Catherine after both grandmothers, Sarah held her namesake and felt her heart expand yet again. Being a grandmother, she discovered, was a special kind of love, all the joy of children without the constant responsibility. James was equally besotted with his granddaughter, holding her for hours, talking to her in a soft voice Sarah rarely heard, making silly faces to coax smiles from her. Watching her husband with their grandchild, Sarah fell in love with him all over again. "You are a wonderful grandfather," she told him one evening after they had returned home from visiting Tommy and Catherine. "I am just practicing," James said with a smile. "I expect we will have many more grandchildren to spoil." He was right. Over the next few years, Tommy and Catherine had 2 more children, boys they named James and Thomas, carrying on the family names. Danny married a young woman named Anna in 1904, and they had a son the following year. Even Maggie, who everyone had decided would be an eternal spinster, surprised them all by marrying a widower teacher who came to Silver Creek with 2 young children of his own. She became a mother overnight, and Sarah watched her daughter bloom in the role. Sarah and James's house, which had been quiet after the children moved out, was suddenly filled with noise again whenever the family gathered, grandchildren running through the rooms, laughter and chaos and joy. Sarah cooked enormous meals for these gatherings, James carved toys for the little ones, and they both marveled at how their family had grown. In 1908, James and Sarah celebrated their 31st wedding anniversary. Sarah was 54, James 53. They were grandparents to 8 grandchildren, with more likely on the way. The ranch was thriving under the joint management of James and Tommy. They had weathered droughts and hard winters, good years and bad, always together, always supporting each other. That night, after all the family had gone home and they were alone in their house, James took Sarah's hand and led her out to the porch where they had spent so many evenings over the years. 31 years, he said, settling into the chair beside her. "Do you remember the first time we sat here together? Our wedding night," Sarah said softly. "I remember everything about that night. Do you remember what I told you that morning on the hilltop before I asked you to marry me? You said you loved me," Sarah recalled, smiling at the memory. "I said I loved everything about you. That has not changed, Sarah. If anything, I love you more now than I did then. You have given me a life beyond my wildest dreams. 3 incredible children, 8 grandchildren so far, a home, a partnership, a love that has sustained me through everything. I look at you and I see my past, my present, and my future. I see the girl who waved at me from her garden, the bride who walked down the aisle to me, the mother who brought our children into the world, the grandmother who lights up when the little ones arrive. I see the woman I will love until my last breath and beyond. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. James Bridger, you are going to make me cry. Cry if you need to, he said gently. I just wanted you to know. Sometimes I think I do not tell you enough how much you mean to me, how grateful I am that you took a chance on a cowboy you did not know. Best decision I ever made, Sarah said, reaching for his hand. Waving at you that morning changed my life in every possible way, all of them good. They sat together in the gathering darkness, 2 people who had built a life from a simple wave, who had turned a moment of courage into a lifetime of love. The Montana sky spread above them, vast and filled with stars, and Sarah thought about all the moments that had led them here. The first wave, the first conversation, the first declaration of love, the wedding, the children, the challenges and triumphs, all of it woven together into the tapestry of their shared life. As the years continued, James and Sarah settled into the peaceful rhythm of their later years. James, now in his late 50s, still worked the ranch but left more of the physical labor to Tommy and the hired hands. Sarah, in her mid-50s, spent her days tending her garden, sewing clothes for her grandchildren, preserving food, and hosting the frequent family gatherings that filled her home with life. In 1912, as they celebrated their 35th wedding anniversary, Sarah reflected on how blessed their lives had been. Not easy, never easy, but blessed. They had faced hardships and sorrows, but they had faced them together, and that had made all the difference. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching yet another Montana sunset, Sarah said, "Do you ever think about that first morning? What would have happened if I had not waved?" James was quiet for a moment, then said, "I would have kept riding past every morning until you did. Or I would have found some excuse to stop at your farm, to speak to your father, anything to meet you. I was meant to find you, Sarah. Fate, destiny, God's plan, whatever you want to call it, we were meant to be together." "I believe that too," Sarah said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Out of all the farms in Montana, you rode past mine. Out of all the mornings I could have been outside, I was there when you passed. Out of all the men in the world, you were the one my heart recognized. And you were the one my heart was searching for," James finished. Everything else was just details. As the sun set and the stars began to appear, Sarah thought about all the sunsets they had watched together, all the conversations they had shared, all the moments of joy and sorrow and ordinary life that had made up their marriage. She thought about the girl she had been, standing in her garden with her hand raised in a wave, taking the biggest risk of her life. She thought about the woman she had become, shaped by love and life and the man beside her. The years ahead held more grandchildren, more gatherings, more quiet evenings on this porch. There would be challenges still to face, sorrows still to bear, but there would also be joy and laughter and the deep contentment of a life well lived. Their children and grandchildren would carry on their legacy, spreading out across Montana and beyond, building their own lives and families, but always remembering the love story that had started it all. James shifted beside her and brought her hand to his lips, kissing it softly. It was a gesture he had repeated thousands of times over their 35 years together, but it still made Sarah's heart flutter. Some things never changed, no matter how many years passed. The way he looked at her, the way she felt safe in his presence, the way they understood each other without words, these things were as strong now as they had been that first morning. "I love you," James said quietly, the words he had spoken countless times, but that never lost their power. "I love you too," Sarah replied, the answering words that were as natural as breathing. "More today than yesterday, but not as much as tomorrow." She had learned that phrase from him all those years ago, and now it belonged to both of them, a promise that their love would continue to grow, continue to deepen, for whatever time they had left together. As darkness fully settled over the Montana landscape, and the stars blazed above them in all their glory, Sarah and James sat together in perfect contentment. Their story, which had begun with a simple wave on a summer morning in 1876, had grown into something beautiful and enduring, a testament to the power of taking chances, of opening your heart, of believing in love. The cowboy had ridden past her farm every single morning, and one day she had finally waved. And it had changed both their lives, forever and for the better, in ways neither of them could have imagined but both of them cherished with everything they had. That wave had been the beginning of everything, the first note in a symphony that had played out over decades, the first word in a story that continued to unfold. And as they sat there, hand in hand, hearts intertwined after 35 years of marriage, Sarah knew with absolute certainty that she would make the same choice again. Wave at that cowboy. Take that risk. Embrace that future, because it had led her here, to this moment, to this man, to this life that was more than she had ever dreamed possible. The grandchildren continued to arrive over the years, each one a blessing and a joy. By 1920, Sarah and James had been blessed with 15 grandchildren in total, ranging in age from 18 down to newborn. Their house, which James had expanded multiple times over the years, was always full during holidays and special occasions. Children running through rooms, teenagers helping with ranch work, babies being passed from arm to arm. James was 65 now, his hair silver, his face deeply lined from decades in the sun, but his green eyes still sparkled when he looked at Sarah. He had finally, reluctantly, turned over the primary management of the ranch to Tommy, though he still helped with decisions and planning, still rode out to check on the cattle when weather permitted, still couldn't quite let go of the life he had built. Sarah, at 66, moved a bit slower than she once had, her hands sometimes stiff with arthritis, her hair completely white now, but her mind was as sharp as ever and her heart still overflowed with love for her family. She spent her days cooking, baking, sewing, reading to the grandchildren who visited, passing on family stories and recipes, teaching the girls how to preserve food and the boys how to plant a proper garden. One afternoon in late summer, as Sarah sat on the porch snapping green beans with her oldest granddaughter, also named Sarah but called Sally to avoid confusion, the young woman said, "Grandma, tell me again how you and Grandpa met. The whole story." Sarah smiled, setting down her bowl of beans, and began the story she had told many times over the years, but never tired of telling. "Your grandfather rode past our farm every single morning, and for 3 months I watched him, wondering who he was, what his life was like, if he even knew I existed." Sally listened, her eyes dreamy, as Sarah recounted that first wave, that first conversation, the courtship and the wedding, the building of the ranch and the family. "It was the bravest thing I had ever done," Sarah said, raising my hand and waving at a stranger, "but it was also the best thing. That one small gesture of courage changed the entire course of my life." "That is the most romantic thing I have ever heard," Sally sighed. "Do you think I will find a love like that?" "I hope you do, sweetheart," Sarah said, reaching over to pat her granddaughter's hand. "But remember, love like that does not just happen. It takes work and patience and commitment. Your grandfather and I have had wonderful years together, but we have also had hard times. What has sustained us is our willingness to keep choosing each other every single day, even when things were difficult." "I want a man who looks at me the way Grandpa looks at you," Sally said, "like you are the sun and he is just basking in your light." Sarah laughed softly. "Your grandfather would probably say it is the other way around. That is the secret, Sally. We each think we got the better end of the deal." That evening, as Sarah and James prepared for bed, a ritual they had shared for 43 years now, James said, "I heard you telling Sally our story this afternoon." She asked, Sarah said, brushing out her long white hair. She is at that age where romance seems like the most important thing in the world. It is the most important thing in the world, James said, coming to stand behind her, taking the brush from her hand and continuing the task himself, something he had done countless times over the years. Without our romance, Sally would not exist. None of our grandchildren would. Everything we have built, everything we are, it all started with love. Sarah met his eyes in the mirror. Do you ever regret it? That you did not find someone younger, someone who could have given you a bigger family, more children? Never, James said firmly. Sarah, you gave me 3 wonderful children and 15 grandchildren so far, with probably more to come. But even if we had never had children, I would not trade you for anyone. You are my person, my partner, my heart. I could not regret choosing you any more than I could regret breathing. We are getting old, Sarah observed, seeing their reflections side by side, 2 people marked by time but still recognizably themselves. We are getting old together, James corrected. Just like we always said we would, and I would not have it any other way. In 1923, Tommy's oldest son, James the younger, announced he was going to college to study veterinary medicine. It was a new generation with new dreams, and Sarah and James supported him completely, proud that their grandson wanted to continue his education, to build on the foundation they had laid. That same year, Maggie's husband passed away suddenly from a heart attack. Sarah ached for her daughter, knowing the pain of loss, though she had been blessed not to experience it with her own spouse yet. She and James opened their home to Maggie and her stepchildren, offering support and comfort through the grieving process. Watching Maggie's pain, Sarah held James a little tighter at night, grateful for every day they still had together. Danny, now 41, had built a successful horse breeding operation on his portion of the ranch land. His horses were known throughout Montana and even shipped to other states. He had 3 children, all boys, who were following in his footsteps, learning the art of training and breeding horses. In 1925, Sarah and James celebrated their 48th wedding anniversary. There was a huge family party, all 3 children, their spouses, 15 grandchildren, and now 3 great-grandchildren, the oldest of Tommy's children having married and started families of their own. 4 generations gathered to celebrate the love story that had started it all. As Sarah looked around at the faces of her family, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. From one wave, all of this had come. Every person in this room, except for those who had married in, existed because she had been brave enough to wave at a cowboy she did not know. The thought was humbling and beautiful. James, sitting beside her at the head of the table, squeezed her hand. "What are you thinking about?" He asked softly. "I am thinking about how one moment can change everything," Sarah replied, "how one choice can ripple out through time and create all of this." She gestured at the gathered family. "Best wave in the history of waves," James said with a smile, and everyone laughed, the family joke that never got old. As they moved into the late 1920s, age began to slow them both down more noticeably. James, now in his early 70s, finally stopped working the ranch entirely, content to sit on the porch and watch his sons and grandsons do the work he once did. He told stories to the great-grandchildren who were now old enough to sit and listen, passed on his knowledge and experience, served as the patriarch of a growing family dynasty. Sarah, 72, still kept her garden, though it was smaller now, and still cooked for family gatherings, though with more help from daughters and granddaughters. Her hands were gnarled with arthritis, her steps slow and careful, but her mind remained sharp, and her capacity for love seemed to grow rather than diminish with age. They still sat on their porch every evening, weather permitting, watching the sun set over the mountains they had looked at for over 50 years. They still held hands, still talked about the day, still found comfort and joy in each other's presence. They had become one of those old couples that people pointed to as an example of lasting love, and they accepted the role with grace, hoping their example would inspire the younger generations. In the spring of 1930, Sarah fell ill with pneumonia. At 76, her body could not fight off the infection as it once might have. She spent weeks in bed, feverish and weak, with James sitting vigil beside her, refusing to leave her side except when absolutely necessary. The family gathered, fearing the worst, praying for the best. Sarah eventually recovered, but it was clear that her health was fragile now. She tired easily, needed help with tasks that had once been simple. James, facing his own health challenges with aching joints and a heart that was not as strong as it once was, still devoted himself to caring for her, helping her with whatever she needed, refusing to let anyone else take over her care. "We are a matched set," he told Tommy when his son suggested they might need more help. "I took vows to care for her in sickness and in health. I meant those vows then, and I mean them now." As Sarah slowly regained some strength, they settled into a new routine adapted to their limitations. They no longer took walks around the property, but they still sat outside when the weather was nice. They no longer hosted big family dinners, but the family still came to them, bringing food and company. They could not do many of the things they once had, but they still had each other. And that was what mattered most. One afternoon, as they sat on the porch with blankets around their shoulders despite it being summer, Sarah said, "James, if I go first, I need you to promise me you will be okay." "Sarah," James started to protest, but she held up her hand. "Please, let me say this. If I go first, I need you to take care of yourself. Let the family help you. Do not give up or let grief consume you. Live out whatever time you have left as fully as you can, knowing that I will be waiting for you on the other side and we will have eternity together." James's eyes were wet with tears. "And if I go first, then I promise you the same thing," Sarah said firmly. "We have had an incredible life together, James. 53 years of marriage, and if we get more time, I will treasure every moment, but we have to be realistic. We are old and neither of us is going to live forever. When that time comes, whoever is left behind has to keep living, keep loving, keep honoring the life we built together." "I love you so much," James said, his voice breaking. "The thought of being without you—" "I know," Sarah said, reaching for his hand. "But we have been blessed, James. Some people never find a love like ours. We have had decades of it, and we still have now. So let's not waste our time worrying about the end. Let's enjoy whatever time we have left." They sat in silence, hands clasped, facing the truth of their mortality together just as they had faced everything else together. As it happened, they had several more years. Years of gradual slowing, of increasing frailty, but also years filled with love and family and quiet contentment. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in 1927, a milestone they had both hoped to reach. The celebration was huge. The entire family gathering, neighbors and friends coming from all over to honor the couple who had been such a fixture in the community for so long. Looking at old photographs from their wedding day, comparing them to how they looked now, the changes wrought by time were obvious. But when James looked at Sarah, he still saw the young woman who had waved at him from her garden. When Sarah looked at James, she still saw the cowboy who had stopped his horse and smiled at her. The physical changes were superficial. What mattered was still there, deeper and stronger than ever. In 1932, at the age of 77, James suffered a series of small strokes that left him weakened and confused at times. Sarah, despite her own health challenges, became his caregiver, doing for him what he had always done for her. Their children tried to help, but Sarah insisted on being the one to care for her husband, helping him eat when his hands shook too much to feed himself, reading to him when his eyes grew too tired to focus on the words, sitting with him through the long nights when sleep eluded him. "You have taken care of me for 55 years, she told him. "Let me take care of you now." On a warm evening in late summer of 1933, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold, James and Sarah sat together on their porch. James was in his chair, wrapped in blankets despite the warmth, Sarah beside him holding his hand. They had been mostly silent, simply enjoying the sunset, enjoying being together. "Sarah," James said suddenly, his voice clear despite his recent confusion, "thank you for waving at me." Sarah turned to look at him, saw the clarity in his eyes, the love and gratitude shining there. "Thank you for stopping," she replied, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I would do it all again," James said. "Every moment, every challenge, every joy, I would choose you again and again and again." "And I would choose you," Sarah whispered. "Always you." James smiled, that same smile that had made her heart flutter 57 years ago, and squeezed her hand gently. Then his eyes closed, his body relaxed, and he was gone, slipping away as peacefully as falling asleep, with his wife beside him and the Montana sunset painting the sky in farewell. Sarah sat there holding his hand for a long time, tears streaming down her face, feeling the enormity of her loss settling over her like a heavy blanket. But underneath the grief was something else, something that sustained her in the days and weeks and months that followed. Gratitude. Deep, profound gratitude for the gift she had been given, for 56 years of marriage to a man who had loved her completely, who had been her partner and best friend, who had given her a life beyond her wildest dreams. At James's funeral, attended by hundreds of people whose lives he had touched, Sarah stood straight and dry-eyed, having wept all her tears in private. She spoke at the service, her voice surprisingly strong, telling the story one more time of the cowboy who had ridden past her farm every morning until she waved, telling the gathered crowd about the man James had been, the legacy he had left not just in the successful ranch but in the hearts of everyone who knew him. "He was a good man," she concluded, "and he made me a better woman. He taught me about love and partnership, about perseverance and faith. He gave me 3 beautiful children, 15 grandchildren, and now 10 great-grandchildren. He built a home and a life that will continue long after we are both gone. And when my time comes to join him, I will go knowing that I was blessed beyond measure to have shared my life with James Bridger." As she had promised him, Sarah did not give up after James's death. She continued living, letting her family care for her, spending her days with grandchildren and great-grandchildren, passing on stories and recipes and wisdom. She missed James every moment of every day, but she also felt him with her, could hear his voice in her mind offering encouragement, could feel his presence in the house they had built together. She lived 2 more years, years spent in reflection and gratitude, years spent completing the quilts she had started, writing down family recipes, recording stories for future generations. She wanted her descendants to know where they came from, to understand the love that had created their family, to appreciate the courage it sometimes takes to wave at a stranger. On a spring morning in 1935, Sarah Mitchell Bridger passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 81. She was buried beside James in the cemetery overlooking Silver Creek, their graves marked with a simple headstone that read, "Together in life, together in eternity." Their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren gathered to mourn and celebrate, sharing stories about James and Sarah, about the love that had sustained them for over half a century, about the legacy they had left behind. The ranch continued, passed down through the generations, each one adding to what James and Sarah had started. Their story became family legend, told and retold, the romance that had begun with a wave inspiring countless descendants to be brave in their own pursuit of love. Years later, when Sally, the granddaughter who had asked Sarah to tell her the story, was an old woman herself, she would tell her own grandchildren about James and Sarah. "Your great-great-grandfather rode past her farm every single morning," she would say, her old eyes misty with memory. "And one day she finally waved and changed his life, changed both their lives. And because of that one brave moment, all of you are here." Never underestimate the power of courage, of taking a chance on love. It can create a legacy that lasts for generations. And so the story lived on, passed down through the family line, a testament to what can grow from a single moment of bravery, a single gesture of hope, a single wave that connected two hearts and changed everything. James and Sarah's love story became the foundation upon which their family was built, a reminder that true love, when nurtured and cherished, can weather any storm, overcome any obstacle, and last not just a lifetime but beyond, echoing through the generations as a promise that love, real love, is always worth the risk. The Montana ranch they built together still stands, operated now by their great-great-grandchildren, the land they purchased and nurtured continuing to sustain the family they created.